Hello everyone, welcome back to Survivor Talks with Mike. Today we'll be covering Survivor 43's Final Tribal Council. I found this season's Final Tribal Council to be quite interesting due to how the jury seemed to view the players and the expectations they had for each player. Firstly, I want to say that I don't want to take away from Gabler's win. He did what he had to in order to get himself to the end and convince the jury to vote for him, and that is the entire purpose of the game. However, I believe that Cassidy played a very similar game, but the jury was either predisposed to not see it or had higher expectations for her to meet than they had for Gabler. So here I want to break down where we can see the jury was not in Cassidy's favor. Right off the bat, I think there could have been some unconscious biases working against Cassidy. We could already see throughout the season that women were being targeted early to the point that only 4 women made it to the merge. I'm not saying that the jury was sexist, just that they have already shown a potential bias against women. The other bias that I think potentially came into play was age. I think that some of the jury might have been unwilling to see someone younger than them as holding any power in the game, as I think a lot of people tend to not want to be told what to do by someone younger than them. Now I want to go into the actual Final Tribal Council and point out a couple of moments where the jury showed some favoritism for Gabler over Cassidy. So the first instance we see is when Gabler is claiming his big move as the Ellie vote. This vote is going to be the one thing that he clings to mostly throughout the Tribal Council, but it's all based on a false assumption. He wanted to get Ellie out because she looked through his bag, but Janine comes out and says that it was actually her that looked through his bag. Now, instead of that being a moment of realization that Gabler screwed over someone else's game by being wrong, the jury just laugh it off and credit him for making a move. In contrast to this, later, Cassidy will claim voting out Ryan as being her move, but Cody and Jesse will say that they actually were the ones behind it, and no laughing and no support for Cassidy in this situation. Now I want to compare these two votes. Gabler had a confessional where he mentions that by throwing Ellie's name out there, he's throwing Ellie's name out there. It's a pretty ridiculous confessional, but it has a lot of value. Just by throwing someone's name out there, people will start to consider voting that person out. And if enough people start considering it, that person will likely get voted out. In the case of Ryan, him and Cassidy were targeting each other from before the merge, so Cassidy had been putting out Ryan's name for a while throughout the merge, and this might have been why Cody and Jesse were even considering voting out Ryan in the first place, as he wasn't really a strategic threat to anyone, so there wasn't too much purpose in voting him out. Now I would like to look at the general perception of each of their games. Gabler starting the game wanting his tribe to vote him out and only relying on the shard in the dark to determine if he continued forward in this game. He then made a splash with the Ellie boot. Before then, as he said, he was going back underwater as the Alligabler and remaining there the rest of the game. He also said he gave himself multiple options to get himself to the end, which on paper sounds great, but when you dig into that, the reason he had so many options was that everyone wanted to go to the end with him because they felt they could beat him. One of his alliances was the Ride or Die alliance he had with Cody and Jesse, which he said was actually ride or die, meaning his intended path to the end would have had him against Cody and Jesse, arguably the two biggest threats in the game. Cassidy, on the other hand, was also very social and made close bonds with mainly 2 alliances. One with Carla and James, which she used to get her through the early stages of the game, and then with Owen and Gabler to get to the end of the game. She also likely bonded a little bit with Janine in not wanting to vote out another woman from the game. She was targeted by several people throughout the season, and each of those people she managed to outlast, including her closest ally in Carla, who started targeting her, and while Owen wanted to get out Jesse, Cassidy convinced him to go for Carla instead. So Gabler made it to the end by never being targeted, while Cassidy made it to the end in spite of being targeted. The last part I would like to touch on is the fire making challenge. So obviously the goal is to get votes of the jury, and the jury seen a lot of value in being the one to take out Jesse. However, I believe the jury was miscrediting who got rid of Jesse. Yes, Gabler defeated Jesse in fire making and deserves credit for doing that. With that said, Cassidy also deserves credit for winning final immunity, preventing Jesse from having that immunity in the first place, and then placing Gabler, the best fire maker we've seen in Survivor so far, against Jesse. Jesse. In my opinion, the credit should be split across the two of them, and there should be no expectation that Cassidy should give up her immunity and put herself in fire-making against Jesse, as she already earned a spot at Final Tribal Council, and it's very likely that if she had done that, they would have just seen it as Jesse having baited her into going up against him. The jury spoke about having a checklist for each player to cross off in order to win, and Gabler crossed off all the checks. I can't help but think that that checklist for Gabler was like the easy mode setting for a Survivor checklist, while Cassidy was on insane difficulty. The expectations parameter for each player was vastly different. Just because you've never caught a football before doesn't mean you score more points for scoring a touchdown than somebody who does it professionally. The expectations should be the same for each player. Again, I'd like to say that Gabler played the game the way that was necessary in order to win this particular season, but I do think the jury was being a little unfair towards Cassidy here. I'd like to know what you think. This was a very complicated Final Tribal Council, I thought, and it's fun to talk about. So let me know in the comments what you think of it, and if you liked it, hit like. If you want to catch the next one, hit subscribe.